Hello and welcome back. I am Mr. Sosotris, and today I wanted to talk to you about War and Peace. I recently finished reading this book. It was incredible. And this is a very, very long book, and there's lots and lots of words, but I will say that it is worth it. There are some long books that feel like they're just long just for the sake of it, usually because they were originally published as serials, so you would get like a chapter a week or a chapter a month or something, and so it was sort of meant to go on for a long, long time. I'm thinking of a book like Hope Leslie, if anyone has ever read that one. It's good, and it's set during kind of the early days of colonial America, but it was sort of a serialized kind of thing, and that particular one, it felt like there was just things that sort of happened just for the sake of it. In this one felt a lot more like a book like Les Miserables or David Copperfield, where everything feels very deliberate. And even though there are some sections that might feel extraneous, they really aren't. Kind of like how when you read Les Miserables, you get to like the Waterloo section and you're like, what on earth does this have to do with the plot? Until you get to kind of a little bit later on and you realize that Waterloo in the public conception was sort of this big, huge, amazing event, and that is sort of the kind of historical, epic kind of thing that the students are trying to sort of recreate when they set up the barricade near the end. They're trying to sort of have another watershed historical moment, and they don't really end up doing that. Yes, there's a cat here. And in this one, it's the same kind of thing. There is two different kinds of writing in this. There's the fiction stuff, the historical fiction, where we have our characters and their personal dramas and their character arcs and their progression through the years. This covers about like a decade of time, and we get to kind of get to know them very, very deeply. And then there's also a number of sections that are more like historical essays. They're more nonfiction, they're coming from a real world perspective, and it's sort of Tolstoy talking about history and how people view history and how society sort of tends to want to oversimplify history in terms of cause and effect, and they want to blame everything on like one man, and if this one man hadn't done this, then everything would have been different. And he talks about the nuances of history and how it works and all that kind of stuff. And that is also important because we need that kind of grounding reality to go alongside the characters' journey. A lot of the characters are stuck in very subjective views of the world and of the war, and their viewpoints change throughout the book, especially characters like Pierre, whose worldview is constantly overturned over and over again. His thoughts of how he thinks things should be are shattered time and again, and he has to keep sort of rebuilding himself as a person. And so we need the sort of more objective historical analysis to sort of show us, first off, what was happening in the war. This follows the Napoleonic Wars, and kind of how it affected things, how it influenced the culture, the society. One big theme in this one is that we see the Russian people sort of reconnect to their sense of nationalism. Like they, at the beginning, they do have nationalism, but Russian culture was very French, and that comes from Catherine the Great. She's one of the ones who was very instrumental in making French sort of the official court language of the Russian court. And so many people in kind of the upper echelons of Russian society were very, very French, and they sort of felt more like Western Europeans than Eastern Europeans. And as we go through this, we see their sort of disillusionment with French culture and the French viewpoint grow, and we see how their opinions change as they come face to face with Napoleon's Grand Army and the people that are fighting for him. And so then we get the sense of sort of Russian nationalism, which a lot of the lower classes already very much had. The lower classes didn't speak French. They spoke Russian, and they were very much tied to the land, and they had a clear sense of sort of culture. And so, yes, I know. And so as the book goes on, we see the upper crust people sort of connect with that and become more and more patriotically Russian and less desperate to be seen as part of Western Europe. And so the journeys that everyone goes through in this are so good. And I'm trying not to make it sound flat or bland, because it's really anything but. If you've seen or heard of the musical The Great Comet, that sort of takes place like here-ish. It's sort of in the early, maybe the first or like the second kind of big section in the book, and it follows all the trials and tribulations. You've got Andre, who's he's been away at war, and he comes back and he's sort of disillusioned with the world. And you've got Pierre, who's really struggling to kind of make sense of what he's supposed to be a good person. He starts off really socially awkward, and he inherits a ton of money, and when he does, suddenly he becomes eligible and sort of thrust into society, and he really doesn't connect with the people in society because he sees them as very shallow, and he doesn't really understand what's going on with them. And we've got Natasha, who's very young and naive. Can you stop that, please? Who's very young and naive, and she sort of gets swept up in a very dangerous affair that is very, very bad for her, even though she has sort of a perfect fiance already. And we've got, Anatole, who's like the toxic hot guy, and his sister, Hélène, who's awful, and just all of their personal dramas and all of the conflicts. And there's like duels and suicide attempts and personal crises. And so there's lots of very human, gripping drama in this. And so don't think of this as some kind of dry, boring thing. This book is phenomenal. It's spectacular, and I loved it so much. The one thing that I really, really liked about this one is that you get to see characters grow and change over time. And I know that's something that a lot of books have, but this one covers a long span of time, but it doesn't feel truncated. Like, it doesn't feel like we've got, this little event, and then we skip forward a bunch of years, and then there's this event, and then we skip forward kind of thing. You really do feel like you grow and evolve alongside these people. And two of my favorite characters, Andre and Pierre, both have such great character arcs where their perception of everyone around them keeps changing and evolving and growing, and you just really become invested in their sort of personal journey. Pierre at one point joins the Freemasons because he thinks that it's sort of an enlightened group that will allow him to sort of find a greater understanding of the world. And then of course that doesn't amount to anything, and he becomes very disillusioned. And it's just, you just become really invested in their journeys. So even though this is a very, very long book, I would say it's very worth it. I had a great time with it. Now, this is a book in translation, and there are kind of a number of translations out there. This one is the Anne Dunnigan translation, and it's pretty good. There is also another translation that's a little bit older, and that one is, I think the last name's Maud. It's a pair of people. Last name's Maud. It's the Maud translation. But that one, it was written kind of in the 1920s. And so those people knew Tolstoy, and it was sort of the closest we'll get to sort of an authorized translation into English. And so that one is one you can usually find. I think that one's really, that's like the audiobooks, the big audiobooks, because I think that one's in the public domain. So that's usually the one that you'll find with that one. And that one is also very, very good. As I was reading through this, there was a couple times where there was sections that I kind of struggled to parse a little bit. And so what I would do is I would then go back through those sections via the audiobook which you can get pretty easily. And that was a slightly different translation. And so sometimes like rereading a section in a slightly different translation with slightly different wording was kind of a way for me to get a better grasp of it. Because there's a few sections that, especially the nonfiction sections, that are very much tied to the context of the people in 1860s Russia. And so Tolstoy was writing to his contemporary historians, and a lot of times he's reacting to things in the academic community that was kind of in discussion at the time. And so some of the references can feel a little obscure to us today, and some of the points that he's making might not make as much sense. But going back through it, you can kind of get a better sense of sort of what he's reacting to, what he's trying to educate his readers about. And I think that was very, very helpful. So if you are struggling with any particular translation, there are other ones, and there's some in the public domain, especially I think the mod translation you can get for free kind of anywhere. That one's pretty easy to find. And so it's always good to sort of go through that. Another thing to be aware of, the mod translation does this well, but there is a lot of French phrases in here. There's some newer translations that translate all the French, and that's not as good. I know like you want to sort of understand what everyone's saying, but it makes more sense when you have the French phrases sort of interspersed in like everyday conversation, especially towards the beginning, because as the book goes on, you see the French sort of fade away. And then there's a character at the end who's sort of still using those old French phrases, and it's sort of meant to make her feel old-fashioned and sort of clinging to like a bygone age almost, even though it's just like 10 years prior. And so the use of the French is valuable, even if you can't fully understand what they're saying. A lot of times there's context and you can kind of get a sense of what it is, but it really helps to add that extra layer to the story, to have the characters saying certain things in French and then, you know, going back to Russian, but like in English. And so that's something to be aware of. If you have a translation that is one that sort of translates everything, or even one that will like have the English translation after the French, I don't know if that would really work as well. I don't know. That's just personal preference. It's sort of whatever works best for you. But I feel like translating the French would, one, make the sentence feel a little clunky because you'd have the French phrase and then the English phrase right after. And I feel like it would sort of ruin the rhythm of the conversation a lot of times. So I don't know. I really liked when there was just moments where characters would just say things in French, and I didn't always pick up on everything that they said. I don't speak French beyond sort of the minor amounts that I learned in school kind of thing. But I think that does help to kind of create the ambiance that Tolstoy is looking for. So that's something to be aware of as well. Also, one other thing I wanted to say was this is not really a book that you need to rush through. This took me maybe 3 weeks to read, and even then I felt like there was parts of it where I was sort of zooming through. Like I would finish a section, and if I was at home and I was able to sort of reread a section via, you know, the audiobook in a different translation, then I did that for sure, especially if it's a section that sort of didn't make sense. But a lot of times I'd read a section if I was out and about, if I was on the bus or whatever, and I'd sort of just jump right into the next section, and I'd be like, well, I didn't really understand everything in that part, but I'll just keep going. And this really rewards sort of slow reading. But another thing that I will say alongside that is there are a lot of characters. And so at the beginning, if you're new to the book, it will feel very overwhelming. And so I wanted to give kind of a primer to sort of help you not feel lost at the beginning, because there are a lot of characters. But the characters that you need to sort of latch on to, and the other characters you'll get to know over time and you'll feel better. But the characters you need to kind of latch onto at the beginning is Andre, Pierre, and Natasha. Now there's lots of others. There's Anatole and Helene and Sonia and Princess Maria and all them. But the characters that I think the ones that feel like the main characters are Andre, Pierre, and Natasha. And so if you sort of fixate on them more than the others, then I think you'll feel a little less overwhelmed by all the characters you meet at the beginning, because it starts off sort of in a salon, and there's a bunch of people all talking and talking about what's going on and everything, and there's a lot of people introduced, and so your brain is kind of looking for the main character. They're sort of wanting to latch onto someone, and you'll be meeting all these people, and you'll just be a little overwhelmed. So Pierre is socially awkward. He's at the beginning of the book, he's sort of mired in a complicated inheritance process where he might be inheriting money, but he's sort of an illegitimate child, so it's complicated, and there's a bunch of stuff going on with that, and he sort of feels awkward and out of touch with everyone around him. Okay. And then you've got Natasha, who's very young at the beginning. I think she's like 14 or 15 at the beginning. She's very young, very naive. She wants to sort of be a part of everything, but she doesn't quite have the maturity yet to sort of understand what all is going on, but she's sort of a go-getter. And then you've got Andre. Andre is sort of idealistic at the beginning. He's very taken with Napoleon, even though at this point Napoleon is sort of on the other side. He sees Napoleon as like this heroic figure, and he really respects him as sort of an opponent. It's sort of like, the honorable opponent hero worship kind of thing. And so he's very, he loves Western European culture. He really looks up to Napoleon, and he's eager to sort of join the fighting in order to kind of get a sense of Napoleon's brilliance on the battlefield. And then, we see how that goes. And so those are the characters that you need to sort of glom onto at the beginning. There's lots of others. There's Princess Maria. She's very kind of old-fashioned and not strict, but she's very proper, And you've got Anatole, who again, he's like this. He's really gorgeous, but he's also an awful, awful person, and you don't want to have anything to do with him, but he kind of gets away with everything because he's so attractive. And you've got his sister, Hélène, who is creepy and, again, super toxic, and there's rumors that him and his sister are, like, in a weird relationship thing, and it's very Jaime Lannister-esque. And you've got Denisov, and you've got there's all these other characters. I spent like 3 weeks with these people, and there's so many of them that I'm like, I can't remember their names, but that's okay. So even if you don't sort of connect with everyone right away, I will say, even though this is very long, this is a book that I think would reward rereading. It's something that you can go through multiple times and get a lot out of each time. It is a big, imposing book, but it's worth it. And so I do want to reread this one in the future, and I do want to sort of go through it, maybe in like a different translation, just to sort of see it with fresh eyes, and just go through this entire huge journey a second time. So yes, War and Peace. It is worth it. It's huge, but it's doable. It's not something that will take up forever. Now the chapters are pretty short, so if you wanted to read this a lot slower than I did, and maybe do like 1 or 2 chapters a day kind of thing, and stick with that, you'd be fine to do that. It might take a little bit longer, but you'd be able to really appreciate the story as you go through it, and you'd be able to connect with sort of the longer character arcs a little bit better, especially getting to know kind of the side characters, because they are important. There's a lot of like long character arcs that have good payoffs at the end, and so if you can follow everything kind of from the beginning and trace kind of how they evolve over time, you do get, it's a very, very satisfying conclusion. Now at the end there's 2 epilogues, And I will say the first epilogue is sort of the fiction epilogue, and then the second epilogue is the nonfiction epilogue. And while I'd never say skip the second epilogue, because you do want the experience of reading the whole thing, it's not long. It's maybe like 50 pages or something. But I will say the second epilogue feels a little unsatisfying as an ending, just because he goes on kind of an odd rant about like Darwinism and how he doesn't believe that it's true, and you're like, where did this come from? And so it's one of those things where it's like, you can read it just to say you have read it, but you wouldn't be doing a bad thing if you sort of skimmed through it. Because a lot of his observations in the historical nonfiction sections are really interesting, and they're good, and they're compelling, and you get a lot of sense of like battle tactics and cultural change and historiography and all that, and it's great. And then you get this last second epilogue, and it just feels a little like old man yells at cloud. So I did read it, so just to say that I'd read it, but I didn't really retain a lot of it. It was just sort of like, oh, okay, this is just what he's doing. So, if you want a satisfying ending to the fictional story, you can stop at the first epilogue, and it does count that you've read the book. So, I'm saying this as someone who read the second epilogue. It doesn't add a lot. There are some points that he makes that do tie back to other things he said, but it doesn't add a whole lot to the overall reading experience. So you can stop at the first epilogue. So just, be aware of that. So this is, here, I'll show you how long it is. This is epilogue part 1. And I think it's like 17 chapters. Yeah, okay. So epilogue part 2 is just this last little bit here. So it goes, it's like 10 chapters. Yeah. So it's about 10 chapters. It's not long, and you can skim through it. There's good stuff in there, but for the most part, I didn't really feel like it made for a very satisfying conclusion. So with that said, don't feel bad if you want to end at epilogue part 1. If you're a completionist, definitely read the whole thing. It won't eat up a lot of time, but just be aware that second epilogue is coming. It's really the only part of the whole book that I felt was a little extraneous, and it could have very easily have been like a lot shorter if he'd focused on like the good historical points he was making, but it just went on a little too long. So that's my only real criticism of this. But this book is gripping and incredible and sweeping and epic. And if you like books that have this kind of vast scope, books like Les Mis or Gone with the Wind or David Copperfield, where you see characters with long character arcs and character growth and shocking twists and turns and drama and upheaval and everything, this is very much the book for you. Now, I also want to say, I have also read Anna Karenina by the same author, and this one's a lot shorter. And I will say, I think overall, I did like Anna Karenina a little bit better. I still think this is an incredible book, so I do highly recommend it. But if you only read one Tolstoy book, I would say you could read Anna Karenina and get a sense of his brilliance and his scope and his ability to capture sort of nuanced human drama and get inside the heads of all of his characters in really profound ways. His female characters feel vibrant and interesting and complex and nuanced in ways that not many other male writers of his day wrote women. And so Anna Karenina is phenomenal. But so, I like both of them. I like both of them a lot. and this book I'm definitely going to reread because I really did enjoy it. But if you only want to read one Tolstoy book, I would say you could read Anna Karenina and get a sense of his style and his art, and you'd be okay with that. So I'm saying that just to get that out there in the world. And in terms of like final thoughts, I don't really have any, but I will say this book has really stuck with me, and I find myself thinking about it even after I've finished it, which is a good sign. And the fact that I do want to reread it one day is also a good sign. So would highly recommend this one. In terms of like the long books that I've read, I still think Les Miserables is still my favorite, like super long 19th century book. But let's see, I'm looking at the other ones. David Copperfield is my favorite Dickens, but I still like Les Mis more than David Copperfield. This, I think, would be about equal with David Copperfield in terms of how much I liked it. I don't know if Moby Dick counts as a super long book, because it really isn't that long, but I really like Moby Dick as well. So, I don't know, maybe I just like torturing myself with really long books. Maybe that's just a me thing, but one of these days I'm going to read Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray. I want to read that one. And I really want to read the unabridged Count of Monte Cristo, because I read the abridged one as a kid, loved it so much, but I want to read the unabridged one. It's on my shelf staring at me, and so one of these days I'll do this. Next up in terms of my Russian author journey is I want to read Dostoevsky next. I've got 3 of his books. I've got Notes from Underground, Brothers Karamazov, and Crime and Punishment. And I don't know which one I want to start with first. I'll probably start with the short one and just ease myself into his style, and then maybe I'll read Brothers Karamazov after that. So we'll see how that goes. I don't know. It's going to be fun. I really enjoyed this, and I feel like more people need to read books like this. Yes, it's big and imposing, and yes, you will be confused at the beginning, but that doesn't mean it's a bad book. It just means that it's a book that rewards rereading. It's a book with substance and depth, and you have to just sort of live with it for a bit before you're able to sort of make sense of who everyone is and what all's going on. The main thrust of the plot is pretty easy to follow. There's a war going on, and at first, in the first section, we see, Russia and France fighting, and Napoleon defeats Russia at Austerlitz, and then they become sort of tentative allies for a bit, and then Napoleon, of course, decides to invade Russia, and so then they're not allies anymore, and there's kind of this sense of this impending doom as Napoleon gets closer and closer to Moscow, and then we've got like the burning of Moscow and the effects that had on the people, and then of course Napoleon is defeated by the harsh Russian winter that he hadn't anticipated, and so his army ends up retreating, and things are doing great. Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture is a celebration of that kind of defeat. You've got the clash of the Russian people and the French army, and it's big and triumphant, and there's cannons and all that stuff. So this is very much a part of the zeitgeist of the whole Napoleonic era. You even got Beethoven, one of his symphonies, his third one, he originally was going to call it the Bonaparte Symphony, and when Napoleon declared himself emperor, he was so disgusted at him. He was so angry and felt so betrayed, because Napoleon was seen as this hero standing up for kind of freedom and liberty and everything, and then he declared himself emperor and just became this despot. And Beethoven was so angry that he changed the name of the symphony to the Eroica, the Heroic Symphony, but it's no longer called the Bonaparte Symphony. And it's just really interesting. And then of course you've got ABBA's song Waterloo, which would be kind of after this, and it would be sort of the Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo. But it's a big part of the culture, and it's important. So I feel like War and Peace is one of those books that everyone should read, just because it's important, and I think we need to keep holding on to difficult books, especially long books, just because we don't want to lose that. Because I know right now we're seeing a lot of books that are are sort of simplistic, and they're all based around sort of predetermined tropes where basically the reader can sort of just pick whatever tropes they like, and then they get kind of this McDonald's order book that has all the tropes that they like, and it doesn't really challenge them in any way. It's sort of just familiar. And there's nothing wrong with reading books that are cozy and warm and comforting, but when it gets to the point where we don't want books to ever challenge us ever, and we only ever want sort of nice, comfy, cozy books that are easy to read and don't make us think too much, that can be kind of a slippery slope. So, I mean, read whatever you want, obviously, but do read difficult books because they are worth it. This book is funny. This book is depressing. This book is gripping and insightful, and everyone needs to read it. And so I'm going to stop talking now because I'll just keep rambling on and on and on and repeat myself. So War and Peace, read it. It's amazing. With that said, I'll let you go. Bye.